Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are hardly deep thinkers. That's the whole point. It's the water bug campaign, right on the surface. But if you ask them, roust them from a dead sleep, what's an existential threat that America faces? Russia, Iran. But number one on the list would be institutional racism. That's the biggest threat we face. Neither one of them can define that term, obviously. Joe Biden gave a speech about it this summer. He didn't even try to define it. He just declared that institutional racism is everywhere. And apparently it is, and they're telling institutional racism caused Kamala Harris to drop out of the presidential primary just as she was about to lose her home state. It's what made that Minneapolis cop murder a man. When the crops failed in ancient Rome, the authorities blamed the gods, but when Democrats don't like something, they blame institutional racism. You've seen a lot of this. But that does not mean that institutional racism doesn't exist. The Justice Department just made a pretty strong case that it does exist. The DOJ has concluded that Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, systematically discriminates against Asian and white applicants. There's not really any question about the evidence. It's overwhelming. The DOJ looked at Yale's admission practices over an 18-year period. What did they find? Quote, Asian American and white applicants have only 1/10 to 1/4 the likelihood of admission as African American applicants with comparable academic credentials. They caught Yale cold. Yale hasn't even denied it, really. It's true. And by the way, everybody knows it's true. Ask any Chinese or Korean American parent you know. They're highly aware of this. Their kid could have straight A's and an amazing SAT score, but he's not going to Princeton. He'll be lucky to get into Boston College because he's the wrong color. Is there a single American who doesn't know this? Everybody knows it. Are we okay with that? Shut up, say Democrats. Stop talking about it. It's not a real problem. As one New York Times writer put it, quote, Justice Department working overtime for those marginalized, oppressed, upper-class white students able to go to Yale, looking after Main Street. Ha! As if that's what it's about. What would be funny would be to see what would happen if Ivy League schools stopped admitting the low IQ children of famous liberals. What would they think of that? People like CNN's Chris Cuomo, who went to Yale because his dad was the governor of New York. Would the New York Times support that? Shutting down the pipeline for the kids of Democratic politicians to Brown, Yale, Princeton, Harvard? Oh, no. That would hit them where they live. But discriminating against some Korean kids so we can feel virtuous? Oh, yeah, we're for that. Another New York Times writer put it this way, quote, it is not discrimination to take into account systemic inequality. Oh, right. So in other words, it's not discrimination to discriminate as long as I'm the beneficiary of the discrimination. Okay, so that's how it works. But isn't that how the Jim Crow South worked? Yeah. But the left doesn't care about details. According to the New York Times, if you're an African-American student who got a Mercedes from your parents for your 18th birthday, you were the victim of systemic inequality. You need a 200-point bonus on your SAT. But if you're a kid from Appalachia who grew up in a trailer park without parents and had to work your way through high school at Crystal Burger, you were the beneficiary of systemic racism. Not one person believes that. It's absolutely ridiculous. It makes no sense. It's insulting to all of us. It's degrading to all of us because it's too unfair. But they don't care. The goal isn't to convince you. The goal is to make you as cynical as they are. They think they can accomplish that, and maybe they can, by rubbing their total lack of moral standards into your face. Just weeks ago, the media that doesn't care about Yale's overt discrimination against Asians was horrified about the term Wuhan coronavirus because it could hurt Chinese Americans. They said they never explained how, but they said it. Watch.
The president referred to the coronavirus as a, quote, foreign virus. And I think it's going to come across to a lot of Americans as smacking of xenophobia.
Xenophobic wartime Trump, where he thinks the only path now is to basically declare the virus public enemy number one, to paint it in somewhat racist terms.
The xenophobia and the racism in outbreak is such a common thing, and it is incredibly dangerous. It is problematic, and it is scary, and I just really want to call that out.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus? Why do you keep using this? A lot of people say it's racist.
It's not racist at all. No, not at all. It comes from China. That's why.
It is, quote, problematic and scary to criticize the Chinese government, but not to openly discriminate against Chinese American children. But you cannot criticize the government of China. Anyone who does must be silenced. White House advisor Peter Navarro was actually thrown off the air for the crime of telling CNN's viewers where the coronavirus came from.
And I will say that this virus that is affecting the United States right now is
the China virus,
the
CCP
you know what?
virus.
We let you say that once, Peter. Please don't say it again on this show. I know why you're saying
it. The China virus.
All right, Peter Navarro, we appreciate you being with us. I know what you're trying to do there.
I know why you're saying it, the anchor scolds.
Right.
You're not allowed to say certain things on the air in CNN or MSNBC, or else you might start thinking for yourself. Watch.
The Wuhan coronavirus has now surpassed the 2003 SARS outbreak.
The first U.S. case of Chinese coronavirus was confirmed at one of her hospitals.
Inside that building is the world's first lab-grown copy of the Wuhan coronavirus outside mainland China.
The Chinese coronavirus death toll has jumped to at least 26 people.
The death toll from the Wuhan coronavirus spiked today.
The Chinese virus, the coronavirus that is worrying the whole world.
This comes as the Chinese coronavirus death toll has jumped to at least 26 people and sickened at least 835 people.
Oh, so it was okay to call it the Wuhan coronavirus because it is from Wuhan, probably from a Chinese lab, actually, the evidence shows. But once that became a public relations problem for the Chinese government, you were racist for saying it. So what can we conclude? Actual racism means nothing to these people. What matters to them is whether they can use racial division to advance a partisan political agenda. Where's the ACLU in all this? The ACLU spent, I don't know, about 100 years worrying about racial discrimination. They were always left-wing. They did some pretty virtuous things. But they announced on Thursday that they have no problem with systemic racial discrimination in college admissions. Quote, calling for an end to consideration of race in college admissions threatens the future of campus diversity. Oh, in other words, says the ACLU, we need racism because it brings us diversity. This, it goes without saying, is totally grotesque. That's why almost nobody says it out loud. They don't want you to talk about it because they can't defend it. And in fact, once the words hit the air and people look at them, they realize, wow, this is disgusting. And yet, Kamala Harris supports it. Along with the ACLU, she is pushing to eliminate the core anti-discrimination law in California. We can't say this enough. That's how shocking it is. In the 1990s, Californians passed, by popular vote, Proposition 209. That recognized that giving racial preference is wrong. It's morally wrong. But Democrats have changed their view. Now they understand that discrimination is key to their goals. A caste system, a system in which Americans are rewarded or punished based on how they were born, allows them to take and maintain power.